engagement has become increasingly critical to the overall success of any organization, especially a bank, because you're challenged with so many different demographics where you need to provide care, but you also have to have guardian tendencies to watch out for fraud.
This is the Leaders Rising podcast. Creating bigger futures, building thriving cultures. We believe you can become a leader worth following.
Tammy, Christian, take us back to your pre-Giant days. What was the bank culture and environment like that set the stage for, hey, it's time to get some outside help here?
I've been with the bank for about 9 years. So when I came, they actually hired me to kind of make some change in the organization and to really be looking at developing talent, putting coaching and people management kind of more at the forefront than what it had been previously. So it was, pretty much what you would expect a bank to be like, very conservative in culture, very, very customer focused. I mean, so much so that sometimes it's to the detriment of the employees, right? Like we just put our customers so much out in the front. When I came, I did a lot with just observing, wanted to jump in with both feet and just make change, and realized that we had to take a little bit more of a slow and steady approach if we were going to be effective and make any kind of real meaningful change in that space. So started out just kind of understanding the lay of the land, and then an opportunity arose for us at one of our branch manager meetings. So if you know a bank environment, we have like a little over 30 branches. So we bring all these managers together who are people leaders and talk about different things on a quarterly basis. And we had this opportunity to say, hey, we need to really change the way that we lead, the way we look at ourselves, the way we look at how we engage with the people in our organization. We need to treat the people in our organization with as much respect and engagement and relational harmony as we do with our customers. And so we had the opportunity to bring Nebel in from the Leaders Rising Network and really talk to our leaders about, hey, how do you see yourselves? We had a lot of fun in space. Tom was very dynamic as always, jumping in, talking to us, really engaging the team. And from there, what we saw from that was so significant that we decided we would engage with Giant and with the Leaders Rising Network to really bring that out further into the organization, starting with our managers. Obviously lead yourself first. And so we brought it to our managers, and then we got so much traction with that, we really brought it out to the rest of the organization. And so in that process, Tammy Pitts joined us, and she's dedicated to talent management. And she's really been able to take that vision and move it forward in a very meaningful way.
Tammy Pitts, coming to you. What was it like coming in partway through that journey? What did you see when you stepped into the bank culture-wise for the first time and experienced some of this new language?
Well, I came from the healthcare environment. So I came from an environment where employees are wired to be very empathetic, very nurturing, very caring, and not that bank employees aren't. But one of the biggest issues we face in banking is fraud. And so while we're trying to build good customer relationships, we're also trying to keep them safe and look out for fraud. So you have to, at some times look for the worst that could happen. So that was a big shift for me, going from, let anyone in, let's take a look at you, to, we got to be careful. Why do you want to do this? How'd you get this information? So when I came in, the Giant language hadn't permeated across the organization yet, but it was very well received by the branch managers that Tammy talked about. And I took the approach, to just listen and take it all in. I think one of my first days was a meeting with Tammy and Tom, and we were talking about implementing, I think it was X-Core at the time, but basically a program for the managers. And I have to tell you, I've, being in human resources field for over 20 years, Tammy's been in it longer than me. We don't have to say any more numbers beyond that. So I've been around a lot of, Myers-Briggs, DISC, all the different assessment. And I have to tell you, as I'm sitting there listening to this, of course, I'm analyzing it and I'm thinking, how does this compare and is this going to be effective? I fell in love with the language very quickly. And of course, Tom and I being wired very similarly, that was a good connection. I really knew that this had potential very quickly to make an impact, not only for the organization, but for individuals as well.
Tom, you coming into the bank from the outside, fresh eyes, fresh perspective related to the bank, but obviously decades of life and leadership experience coming in. What did you notice in those early days?
I would notice, although I was a rookie in the giant realm, but very enthusiastic about it. My own journey was like, wow, I wish I would have had this in my previous career. Then it was like, I wish I could be this. And then I was like, I don't know if I want to really be this transparent and forthright and, vulnerable to, hey, I really do want to do this. But when I came in, I have to say I was astounded. When we did initial work with leaders and managers, I was astounded at how many nurturers there were inside National Exchange Bank. And I know the standard number across the world is 43%. I think it was more than that, Tammy, Christian. I'm trying to remember how we originally looked at it. And I was like, this doesn't compute for me. I would have thought much more guardian, and that's for sure there. But I would say that was my surprise until people started to say, think about it, Tom. Relational trust matters so much, especially with all these branches and these small town branch managers and the face of the bank being a person that they could trust and was truly empathetic. And I would just say that was a big notice for me. And I would just say, honestly, you're around the three of us long enough and you're going to say, wow, the three of you really did grow up together. Although we each have fantastic resumes and history, the three of us really grew up together, learning this in various different ways and then looking for ways to bring it into an organization.
It's interesting how those voice percentages play out from what we expect in the population versus what we see in healthcare. Nurses and caretaker roles I often see are much higher in nurturers. And you're right, Tom. I think when we consider a financial role, we want the management of the dollars and cents to be a guardian. But you're right, with the shift in expectation, that's not the end all be all. It's the relationship for those working in the branches and interfacing with people. I think about my mother-in-law who spent her entire career working her way up as a small local bank became bought up by a regional bank, by Mid-Atlantic Bank, by a national bank. She is the quintessential nurturer and was well loved by everyone she worked with in Treasury Services. All of their clients just absolutely adored her. But none of the three of you are nurturers. Tammy and Tammy, talk to me about your interaction and how being, as we would call it, nemesis voices. How did that benefit or challenge you as you began working to roll this out across the bank?
Well, that's interesting you should bring that up because both Tom and Tammy are connector creatives and I'm the guardian pioneer. So you can imagine I was outnumbered from the start. At first, we might have been a little challenged by it, right? Where are you coming from? Are you going to land? Me, I'm always like, are you going to land this soon, Tom? Or are we going to figure out where we head? And then we realized that we could bounce ideas off of each other so easily, right? And it was like, what about, right? And pretty soon we realized how much we really complement each other. So we can get to that maximum complexity and I can be the one who says, okay, time out. Let's now talk about how we want to go forward and how we want to implement that. So we kept our feet on the ground, but we could still be thinking visionary about how are we going to take this forward? And Giant kind of was in its infancy when we started this. Like in some regards, we were saying we need this next thing and Giant didn't quite have it yet. So we were collaborating at the ground level on figuring out, well, how do we move this forward?
I think we've come to be the best connector guardian team there is. And Tammy and I have known each other professionally in our community, both being in different employers in the HR space for a long time. But when you really work with someone day in and day out, you really get to know them at a whole different level. And I think that's been the biggest aha for me, is really working to, number one, appreciate having the opposite voice. I think we all know that we've got to complement ourselves with someone that thinks differently than us. But really being able to manage that day to day and being comfortable having the language and bringing support and challenge to each other. So that's been such a growth for me. I thought I had it figured out when I came here. Well, I was maybe close through working with Tom and Tammy, as well as just learning from others and implementing, the materials. I've learned so much about myself.
Well, and I think that we have been able to use our story on how we've grown together through this process with the rest of our organization. Because if you think about it, yes, we have a lot of nurturers who are taking care of our customers, but on the sales side, our lenders, they're connectors, right? They want to be out in front of people. They want to be talking and connecting with people. And so we naturally have those nemesis voices, so to speak, within our organization based on the types of positions that we fill, right? And so when we can use our story to say how we've grown and used the tools to make our relationship stronger and better, then the rest of the organization is kind of seeing that and kind of understanding, oh, that makes perfect sense for all of us, right?
Let me illustrate something along those lines, because the applause I have for you, I'm thinking about how you would go first in terms of being real, being vulnerable, and putting things out there. And I distinctly remember a time, Tammy, when we had our very first, maybe second meeting. No, I think it was the first meeting, but we were calling people to some vulnerability about self-preservation. There was a palpable lack of trust in that room because people wondered, where would this go? Would we be strangled with this? But I remember it was you, Tammy, and then another colleague of ours, Nicole, were opening up and telling some real vulnerabilities, and it really opened up and it unlocked the room. And Aaron, if you could have been at another meeting when Tammy Pitts had said, okay, I'm going live, and she got up to the microphone and said, okay, I'm going to tell you some things. And it was, I don't know, there were about 60 leaders. We were at a golf course conference room there. And when Tammy opened up, it changed the dynamic of trust in that room in an incredible way, at which point the president of the bank at the time stood up and he said, okay, we want to thank Tammy for showing us how to do it. So there was applause, but those were seminal moments where these two ladies showed one another how to do it. And I love that your story continues, but it was that display of vulnerability and self-awareness that were really earth shakers in terms of the cultural development.
As you look across the bank and you've learned your voices and you've recognized, as you described, Tammy, the connectors on the sales side, nurturers in those branch positions, how did those two segments begin to interact in a healthier, clearer way with other voices in leadership?
I think that's a good question. I think that learning to be vulnerable has been really critical because people will put themselves out there. It's less self-preservation going on. I just see more open dialogue going on. I see people being able to laugh at themselves a little bit, which again creates that relationship versus I can't fail. I mean, I'm a guardian pioneer. Like, that is huge to me, right? Like, I cannot fail. But when I start saying, I maybe don't know everything and maybe somebody else can help me, and we start putting ourselves out there, I think that changes a lot. Our leadership team is comprised of quite a few guardians. We have a couple pioneers, a little spattering here and there of connectors. So I think as they've learned a little bit more about themselves, they've made it a little bit easier for the rest of the leaders in the organization to reach across lines, to be vulnerable, and to kind of break down some barriers.
Yeah, actually, I've got a great illustration of what you were just saying there, Tammy, and it relates to an online meeting that we had a couple of years ago, and I remember it was with your top team at the bank, and we were going through some constructs and so on, and talking about how voices relate to one another. Now, again, this is at the executive management level, and we were moving on. I remember it was a remote meeting. I remember exactly where I was when the meeting was taking place, and then the president of the bank at that time, Jim, he stopped me. And he stopped us and he says, hold on just a second, everybody. He says, I'm doing some sober reflection right now. Jim was a guardian, as so many leaders would be in a regulated industry like the bank. But he said, I've just been reflecting on how I've undermined connectors over the last several years. And he said, we lost a couple of good ones this last year, one to retirement, one to relocation. I really wish that I had not undervalued them the way that I should have, because of how critically important they were to the extent of the bank's success. And he said, honestly, I want to do things differently going forward.
Looking back over these last few years, you've now built the culture. You've made this a part of the DNA of National Exchange Bank. How are you keeping it strong and continuing to onboard new team members into an existing strong culture?
One of the things that we do is we make sure every new employee takes the 5 Voices assessment, and they begin talking about their profile report with their manager. Another thing we started doing over time is every manager does individual one-to-one meetings with their employees. We focus the leadership development on they are Sherpas, they're developers of people. So embedded in those one-to-one meetings are all the support and challenge at a personal and professional level to develop them. It's kind of at both ends, right? The leadership development and also every new employee that comes in. So we do a regular onboarding with new employees. Every employee goes through it, and I do a presentation with them, which follows Tammy's presentation somewhat. She talks about the organization makeup, the strategy, and I talk about what we've called Team Essentials, which is our brand name for all things Giant. And I talk about why we do it, what it is, and I dabble a little bit in 5 Voices and some of the other tools that we use. So it's intentional on both sides with new employees coming in and in developing our leaders.
Well, to tag on to that, we do employee engagement surveys, and we just recently did a survey with our organization, and we're using now some of the language and tools from Giant in helping to do action planning with our managers. So we're really trying to integrate that into our culture and really make it that common language, right? It's kind of a shortcut for us to be able to get to outcomes much more quickly.
I'm glad you brought that up, Tammy. Having this survey, we implemented doing employee engagement surveys 3 years ago now. Doing that along with the Team Essentials or Giant material really gave us some hard numbers to focus on and show how it was working. And now we can transition to more execution and alignment and capacity rather than just focusing on communication relationships. That's great. We understand it. We're using the language. Now what? Now we're solving problems and leveraging strengths.
Well, that's fantastic. You took the question right out of my mouth. I was going to say, what's different now? Solving problems, leveraging strengths. I was reading, one of our team members highlighted a book a few weeks ago that said leaders who have weekly one-on-one meetings with their teams increase employee engagement by 20%.
Mm-hmm. I think I read the same thing.
It wasn't a specific kind of one-on-one meeting. It was just have that regular rhythm. And so combining that with common language, it sounds like it's been a game changer for the bank.
It definitely has.
It sure has.
Tom, as you leaned in and started working with the bank, walk us through what that structurally looked like from a programmatic offering perspective. How did you engage with the bank?
Yeah, we started out, which would not be an uncommon place to start, which would be considered like training space where you're putting a whole bunch of people in the room. And, they're getting information. You've got the talking head, you've got the workbooks, and that's where Tammy was referring. Yeah, Tom was good at this. I can stand in front of a microphone. We were starting to implement some things, and then the question was, well, we might not need you for too long, Tom. After this. And what was interesting, though, I remember a conversation that we had where we looked at a tool that it's called intentional multiplication. And it just looks at all the different ways you need to multiply to see a full force multiplying effort happen. And it has to do with everything from apprenticeship with a few people to, what you might call coaching groups. And then you go up a little bit further to that training space and then, the wide reach keynote kind of things. And honestly, when the Tammys and I were looking at this, we were going, we know that we can't let this just be flavor of the day. We've got to embed this. So what we did is we stayed in some training space, but then we started to implement other things. And I don't know, Tammy, you might remember, Tammy Pitts, you might remember, but I started to do a handful anyway, of kind of one-on-one things, working with particular executives that we wanted to really serve well. And we were doing that, but then we started to implement core groups and things like that. So that's structurally how it was going, Aaron. And then over time, the bank has become less dependent on me and more embracing and using our electronic platform, because ultimately that's what we want. We want people to self-service.
One thing, when we were working with the managers and we were rolling out the material, there was an aha that everybody needs this.
Yeah.
And that was one thing. I think what we did at that point, we were about 3/4 of the way through the material with the managers, and we told them, we're going to roll this out to all employees now. So you're going to be delivering this material. And that is one point in time I wish I could go back to and do differently, because everyone's at a different place and comfort level, and our culture was also getting used to being vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we had some roadblocks, COVID as well, but it allowed us to do a little bit of a reset and approach it from, what problem are we trying to solve, and then apply the tools appropriately.
By the way, great comment there, Tammy, because I was thinking, what COVID did, if nothing else, it showed the bank that a lot of things could be done digitally, right, or electronically, whereas previously we'd really been stuck on in-person delivery. I think that was part of the reset also.
It sure was. And it gave people a little bit more comfort in, well, we might not get this right the first time, but we've got to do something.
How do you quantify success in what you've been working on in building the culture at National Exchange these last few years?
Well, one of the basic measures in the HR space and measuring the effectiveness of your people strategies is your employee engagement surveys. And it's important to understand that employee engagement is more than just satisfaction. Yes, I like my job, I like my manager, I get paid well, end of story. It's a two-way relationship. And I think we've seen that in industry changes as well. We've gone from the industrial revolution to more of a relationship-based industry now, and we've got to be able to do things very quickly. So engagement has become increasingly critical to the overall success of any organization, especially a bank, because you're challenged with so many different demographics. You need, as I said before, you need to provide care, but you also have to have guardian tendencies to watch out for fraud. Our engagement surveys we've been doing now for about 3 months. We use an outside vendor to ensure anonymity and to really get that unbiased overview of the results. And so I was very thankful that our leadership was willing to put in the resources and the time in order to study that. So our overall engagement, we've had some significant increases. Every survey measures a little bit differently. So in measuring engagement items, and how I describe engagement is the extent to which employees are willing to go above and beyond and execute discretionary effort. It's more than just a job. It's a relationship with the community, with your employer, with your coworkers. And we've heard, a lot of studies over time what contributes to that, and a lot of that is the manager. So we are seeing nice increases in our overall engagement. We went up by 0.1 of a point, which doesn't sound like a lot, but traditionally in employee engagement surveys, once you reach a certain point, it's very hard to get, substantial increases. You might increase very small amount. So we started out with a good score. I was expecting maybe just an incremental increase, but we had a larger increase than what I had expected. And I specifically look at the relationship with the manager scores, and that consistently is almost 100% favorable. The studies say it, we're seeing it in our results. It's working. Organizationally and as a bank, we continue to have a very solid balance sheet. We've been successful even in this market with interest rates rising. And it all goes back to valuing the relationship between our employees and with our customers. And so we understand that relationships stand the test of time. There's a lot of things getting thrown at us right now in banking, not only just the interest rates, increased regulation, the fraud is just coming at us left and right. Being able to have really healthy relationships internally and get engagement, not just compliant, has been a big contributor of our success.
Well, that's something we hear a lot in any regulated industry, is that word compliance. And we talk about it from a leadership perspective, that we want to move people from compliant leadership, whether it's guidelines and regulations or just simply expectations, and call them up to the possibilities of, let's engage, come have a seat at the table, use your voice, whatever your voice is, and weigh in, tell us what's going on. And so often we see those gaps that, as we talked about earlier, the gaps between voices and, in your context, branches versus executive leadership. If the voice isn't heard, then everything that's coming down is compliant oriented and not engagement oriented. And if we can raise engagement, that's a game changer. Mm-hmm. Well, Tammy and Tammy, thank you so much for your time today. It's always good to hear from the Tammys at National Exchange Bank. I've heard you talk a lot through the years about National Exchange Bank. Today was my first conversation with the Tammys. It's almost like folklore hearing about them so much. And now here we are. Walk us through what you've seen throughout your experience with National Exchange.
I'm going to start just by thinking through the lens of self-preservation. And it just means I'm in the room. There's stuff I want to prove. There's stuff that I want to hide. There's those kind of things, but so is everybody else. And I would just say, I'm thinking of myself. And when I think back to the earliest days, all the self-preservation I had, wanting to prove myself and being really careful and not as free to be me because of my own internal fears. But I was also thinking about Tammy Pitts. Now, she was brought in to be the talent development specialist. And I remember, I don't know, it was the very first or second meeting when we were together with Tammy Christian. And Tammy Pitts was so good at being open with her own self-preservation. She looks at me as this consultant and she says, I'm afraid because I feel like you're taking my work away from me. And as soon as she said that, it just invited my own transparency. I said, well, I'm afraid because if you all don't need me, I can't make a living, right? But all we had to do was get that out there and then open up into that space of, wait, we're like ants fighting over an elephant. We got a lot of work to do here, and we're going to put that in the rear view mirror. That was one thing I was thinking, is just how, like an HR department, you could understand how they might be concerned. Maybe they'd be happy with book of the month, right? Or, hey, everybody watch this video, or sending people to trainings, but they might be threatened by a cultural development specialist to be in there. But in this case, once we got past the early rumbles on that, it was just so powerfully evident how much they needed me, but how much I needed them, and how in the process, we just became the best versions of ourselves. And true to form, these are some of my best friends, ever, to the degree that clients become friends.
That's a great perspective on that relationship and the high level of trust that we get into with people, because, most of the clients that we work with have such a high view on their work and their level of excellence and their investment in that. And so when anyone comes in questioning your work or raising a new perspective or shining a light maybe on the cobwebs and the shadows where, I was trying to keep that off the radar of everybody else, that can be uncomfortable, out of that discomfort. I was talking to one of our team earlier about discomfort and just how much transformation and breakthrough there can be when we do get uncomfortable. We can then translate that back to every interaction going forward once we take that first step of being uncomfortable.
That's really well said, Aaron. Could I ask you, as you were watching the three of us interact, was there anything else you picked up on?
Yeah, with the 5 voices, first conversations can always give you an impression of what someone's voice might be. I could sense in that conversation between the three of you, there was a maturity and an experience. There was a balance of the voices that each of you were able to bring the natural energy of your primary voice, but you had so balanced and refined that natural first voice with the other voices. I've met a lot of guardian pioneers throughout the years. Some of them aren't the most comfortable people to be around. And I did not get 1 ounce of that from Tammy Christian. Tammy Pitts, on the flip side, showing her connector colors, but in a measured kind of way. And there's ways that each of them I could see mirror each other, but have an openness, a willingness to hear every voice. That's really important in a team, to understand all the voices, understand those perspectives, and actually invite other voices to speak up and speak out.
Yeah, actually, Aaron, you're calling up something which I'm going to go back a few years, but it was when the three of us, and over there that we just at the bank they call us T to the third, and that's how we will communicate with each other. Hey, we need a T3 meeting. But I remember we would meet at various places to sort of ideate what was going to be next. And there was a branch boardroom we were meeting in one time. Tammy Christian, the guardian pioneer, she's with Tammy Pitts and me, and we are ping-ponging ideas, bing, bing, bing. It was like being stuck in a nuclear reactor. To her credit, she did not run from that or shut us down. She would just say things like, hold on, let's not boil the ocean. She'd have to take a breath and those kind of things. But I think it was because she was in the power position, not only in strength of voice, but also in her role at the bank, where she could have just stifled us. But instead, she did 2 things at once. I want to hear it, but not at this speed, not in this place. We need to land some things. It was that brilliance, I think, that allowed us really to thrive. And honestly, be friends to this day.
Incredible conversation. Thanks, Tom, for introducing me to the Tammys. Thanks for bringing your voice to the table. Dr. Tom Nebel, founding partner of Leaders Rising Network, and Wisconsin's biggest Flying Squirrels fan. So thanks, Tom.
There you go. All right. Thank you, man. So long.
We'll link to the tools and resources that we've mentioned throughout this. Take the 5 voices if you haven't already, and begin your own journey of discovery. We'll link to all that in the show notes. Thanks to Dr. Tom Nebel for joining me. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leaders Rising Network podcast. Connect with us on LinkedIn or visit online at leadersrisingnetwork.com.